It's my honor to bring up Frank Gaffney, who's been a great friend for many years. I've learned so much from him. He's been the main engine behind getting this event, getting the whole thing going on the road. All the bios are in here, so I don't need to take your time. Perfect moment to ask people to make sure you turn your phones off. Thank you. We will have 3 speakers, then they'll all come up for Q&A. In the meantime, if you could write, if you have questions for them, be sure to write them on your pad and I'll collect them, and that's how we'll do the Q&A. So please join me in welcoming Frank Gaffney.
She gave you all the good stuff, actually. Thank you so much for being here. This is our shakedown cruise, as I put it to Karen earlier. And we're learning how best to do the mission that we've set for ourselves in this incredibly important election cycle, which is to try to present to people who are influential members of key communities like Georgia, who may decide the election of the next president of the United States, that the issues that we're going to talk with you about today must be voting issues. They're going to shape the future of this country. And if those going to the polls are unaware of them, let alone uninformed about them, chances are things are not going to go right. So this isn't a partisan appeal. This is not a partisan program. This is simply laying out facts that we hope, if you aren't already pretty clued up about them, you will be more so, and that you will help us reach people beyond those in this room and even those that will see this video, to educate them, to enlist their help, to make sure that they are, as the founders envisioned, equipped to make the kinds of decisions about the future course of the country that will determine its fate. So I'm going to just flesh out a little bit some of the things that Karen touched on initially to sort of set the stage for this extraordinarily impressive set of speakers that we'll present to you in the course of the day, and the topics they'll be addressing. The nice thing about going first is you get to say something about all of these things that they will cover in much more detail, because in fact they're much more expert on all of them than I am. I've learned a lot over the years being able to have them on radio shows and television programs and otherwise interacting with them. Notably, as Karen mentioned, in the course of a series of programs that we've done weekly, at least for the better part of 2 years now, under the banner of the organization that our friend Brian Kennedy chairs, called the Committee on the Present Danger, China. And I'm going to come back to that title in a bit. The committee does these webinars to try to give people kind of a deep dive on 2 of the things that I think are of paramount importance, again, to not only making the case that we are in a world war brought to us by the Chinese dictator, Xi Jinping, but also the character of the war and the fact that it's been going on for decades. And we've mostly been oblivious to it. So the webinars have basically 2 focuses. One is to describe what unrestricted warfare, as practiced by the Chinese Communist Party, is. The other is who's helping them wage it with devastating effect. To the first point, what is it? Well, helpfully, back in 1999, 2 people who were at the time senior colonels in the People's Liberation Army wrote a book. And it was called Unrestricted Warfare. And that book obviously had to have been blessed for publication by the Chinese Communist Party. And if there's any further question as to whether or not these guys were just off on a toot, they actually went on to become, I think, major generals in both cases in the PLA. So they're not outliers. They're not people who, were conjuring up a plan that they thought would be good. They were speaking on behalf of the PLA, People's Liberation Army. So that makes all the more important what we've learned, both from their book and from, our study of the matter, about unrestricted warfare. And as Karen said, it's basically what the name suggests. Anything goes. Until now, short of old-fashioned kinetic, explosive, destructive warfare. And what they've done is they've gone through, and if you pick up the book, actually, you'll find that there's this list of, I think, over 20 different items that specify what are the kinds of warfare they're talking about. I think arguably the single most important of which has been the strategy of getting us to finance their war against us. That Lenin, I think, was credited with the old line about, the capitalists will sell us the rope with which we'll hang them. The Chinese Communist Party has taken this the next step, which is to get the capitalists to finance the purchase of the rope with which they will hang us. And the bad news, folks, is it's not their money they're doing it with, it's yours. If you're in a pension fund, 401k, mutual funds, index funds, exchange-traded funds, other kinds of investment vehicles, chances are a good slug of your money is being made available to the Chinese Communist Party through companies that are in some cases state-owned enterprises. In other cases, they're simply Chinese Communist Party-controlled companies. Some of them, this may be particularly galling, actually support the People's Liberation Army in preparing it for that other kind of war, the shooting kind of war. And the kinds of things that they're doing in the meantime, which is, as Sam Faddis will talk about, intelligence operations, subversion, and preparing for the shooting piece. Another aspect of this is the influence operations, political warfare. This is something that Trevor Loudon is a genius about. And it's the use of every available means to try to suborn, influence, coerce, or capture people here to get them to help them there. And you can go through sort of all of our most important institutions and you see this at work. And again, it goes back to 1999. This isn't just yesterday that suddenly we are tumbling onto this. This has been slowly, steadily, inexorably advanced by them as part of a deliberate strategy. So, academia, for starters. As you may have noticed, we've had a bit of a wake-up call as to the communists on America's campuses in just the past month or two. Now, they're not the only ones acting up there, of course, and I'm not here to say that they're all Chinese Communist Party operatives, but I am telling you they are all benefiting from the help and in some cases the active support if not actually the direction of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, they happen to also be working with another set of totalitarians. I prefer the description Sharia supremacists. But whether they're homegrown communists or whether they're homegrown jihadis or whether they're people getting help from the outside, in the case of the Chinese Communist Party notably, or the Muslim Brotherhood or Iran in the Sharia supremacist category, they wish to do us ill. And this isn't just, undermining our friends in Israel or helping Hamas win. It's helping take us down too. In Hollywood, you see a similar kind of phenomenon. You've seen films not made because they are afoul of the guidelines that the Chinese Communist Party's operatives, who now in some cases own studios, Brian Kennedy's out in that part of the world, he knows all about this, or simply censor films, not least by saying you will not have that film brought to China if it does not meet our conditions. Which does in fact translate into, famously the patch on Tom Cruise's jacket not having the Taiwanese flag on it. Well, that's a fairly small sample. More frequently, it's that the bad guys in the film are not the Chinese communists. It's, the North Koreans or some terrorist organization. But then you also get the propaganda that the Chinese are actually pushing out being mainstreamed through our popular culture. You get films that they want made that feature narratives that they find useful. And especially if you will not get your film in China unless it meets all those tests, you'll see this done. And what's been interesting to me is that, as with most other industries that the Chinese have gone after, they've bought up Hollywood for the purposes of figuring out how to do it, this pop culture thing, and simply supplant us. Electric vehicles is another example of where this is happening at the moment, and you could go on and on. Then there's the political elite. And I think in the course of the program, you'll hear from all of us at one point or another. Joe Gebbia has been doing incalculably important work trying to talk to members of the political elite, educating them about China, encouraging them to take steps, as he did here in Georgia, to prevent them from buying up our land, for example. We just had a signing ceremony recently with the governor on that important initiative. But it's actually worse than all of that, because to the extent that what we are witnessing is captured elites in political office, and if this hasn't come to your attention before now, I regret to say that it includes the President of the United States. And Sam Faddis, I will allow to say this in his own right since he's here, but he's got a great line on how you would characterize the President of the United States based on his experience recruiting and running agents for the CIA. But suffice it to say, and he's not with us today, but he's contributed to some of our programs, Peter Schweitzer has done a fabulous book called Red-Handed, in which he just lays out the evidence of how these corrupt individuals, and whether they're corrupted by money or whether they're corrupted by Eric Swalwell's girlfriend or whether they're corrupted by, ideological affinity. And again, this is something that Trevor will tell you about, is rampant. In fact, you've got two sets of his recent books talking about the United States Senate's security risk senators, Well, you put all this together, ladies and gentlemen, and you've got what I think is described technically as a problem. And whether the problem is as acute as we think it is, or it's just, a garden variety problem, that you have a foreign power that has made no secret that it seeks the destruction of this country, that has been successfully penetrating and influencing and subverting our country, well, that's bad enough, I think. But if they're actually doing it as part of a strategy to destroy it, to have a decisive victory over us, then it demands our attention, especially when we are going to be facing choices this fall. And it's not just at the presidential level, it's down ballot as well. In fact, Mike Pompeo, who was then the Secretary of State in February of 2020, went to the National Governors Association meeting. And he kind of blew up their heads by saying the Chinese Communist Party is after every single one of you. They've got actually lists. List of friends of China, lists of enemies of China, and lists of those that are up for grabs. And they're trying to work on all of you. Whether you know it or not, they are. So it's not just at the presidential level, it's not just at the governor's level, it's down to, state legislatures. And again, Joe's doing fabulous work, which I know he'll tell you about, with a group he calls State Shield. And we're going to talk about specifically one action item that I want to finish up with. But the main point I wanted to impress upon you is, and we've got a book too, called The Indictment. I think some of you get it just for being here. Some of you get it for being nice to me. But all of you, I hope, will take a look at it. It's the product of those webinars, the first 70 or so of them at least. We've done, I think, about 180 of them now. But it helps distill down this problem of, one, the relentless, comprehensive, systematic, disciplined, and successful, unrestricted warfare. And two, the results of this elite capture, turning people of influence and power into friends of China. Sometimes they call them old friends of China. But however old they are, they're part of the problem. They are aiding and abetting the enemy. And one of the reasons why we call this book The Indictment is on the theory that if these people are held accountable for the damage that they're doing to our country, maybe they'll stop doing it. Or maybe it'll at least discourage other people on Wall Street, for example, or thinking about getting into public life, or otherwise being targets. Hollywood, the media too, not least. Maybe they'll behave better as well. And if they're not, I would argue that at least in the court of public opinion, they need to be shamed. They need to be demonstrably targeted as people who are harming our country. And I mention this in part because I had a series of conversations recently about the fact that it's now unmistakable that China is seriously engaged in warfare against us, and is now poised, thanks to, among other things, the financing that we've given to the People's Liberation Army, to wage the old-fashioned war, the shooting war kind, against us. So when you see people taking your money and giving it to those guys, it's hard not to say, listen, that's betrayal of our country. That's actually treason. But what you hear from them now is, well, as long as it's not illegal, we're going to continue to do it because there's money to be made. And we owe it to our shareholders, after all, to make money. Well, that's kind of an quaint anachronism. That's when we used to think that shareholders mattered, not stakeholders. That's the DEI scheme. But my point is this, that if you think this is a problem, and if it's remotely possible that people in your circles of influence might do so as well, this would be a really good time to be communicating that, at least as I say in the court of public opinion. I'm not an attorney, and I've had people say that, well, actually, you know, there's a thing in tort law, RICO statutes, that allow you as a private citizen to bring causes of action against people who are engaged in racketeering. Well, that's what's going on here, is racketeering. Whether that can be made to work or not in the courts of law in this country, I don't know. But I do know that we have an opportunity and we have an obligation to be lighting these people up and making it clear that what they're doing, especially when they cynically say, well, as long as it's not illegal, but then they turn around and they hire the best lawyers and lobbyists that they can find to make sure that it never becomes law to prohibit what they're doing. A little cynical, maybe, but more to the point, it is treason, and it is going to get a lot of Americans killed if it persists. Because they are now, I believe, ready to go to war with us, the shooting kind. I did a commentary this morning advertising this meeting, and I pointed out that this is occurring, as you probably heard, on the occasion of today's Putin-Xi meeting in Beijing. Now, there's a funny little fact to know and tell about all these meetings that people have in Beijing. It seems that right after they do, they come back and they go invade somebody. Putin in 2020 went to Beijing on the eve of the, I call them genocide games, the Olympics, and about 2 weeks later, after the games were over, to be sure, but 2 weeks later or so, he goes into Ukraine. I have to tell you, they talked about that, and I'm pretty sure that Xi must have greenlighted it. And then there were the trips that Iranian and Palestinian leaders took to Beijing shortly before they all went into Israel and started lighting up much of the rest of the Middle East as well. Nicolas Maduro, the dictator, communist dictator of Venezuela, went to Beijing, and shortly after he got back, he said he was going to go invade Guyana. Now, he hasn't done that yet, but it could happen at any time. So it's a little bit concerning when these guys get together, kissing the ring in Beijing, and I call it strategic arson that seems to result. It's Xi spinning off tinderboxes around the world. And the reason that I believe he's doing it, and I'll finish this part of the conversation or monologue on this point, is I think to create sufficient distractions and depleting commitments, particularly of our military arsenal around the world, that we will not be available or ready to deal with his particular act of arson, which everybody assumes is Taiwan. Well, it turns out he's seemingly trying to stir things up with the Philippines at the moment. But of even greater concern, and others will talk about this, particularly Sam Faddis, who's done a real study of it, I'm very concerned that one of the other things he's got in mind, and maybe it's just as a distraction, maybe it's just as the final, run up to the invasion of Taiwan, or maybe it's about finishing the job of taking us down. But when you combine the fact that he's brought in, by some estimates, multiple divisions worth of People's Liberation Army personnel across our open borders, north and south, by the way. And as Sam will, I know, talk to you about, there are some places in this country that you really don't want People's Liberation Army people hooking up with. Whether it's, you know, as targets or whether it's as the means to inflict incalculable harm on us. This is a problem too, and one that we are doing nothing about. Oh, we hear Christopher Wray periodically talking about what a concerning thing it is that all this is taking place. But that doesn't seem to translate into the FBI actually doing much about it. And again, Sam will read you in on all of that. So let me just take 5 minutes to set the stage for what I know Joe is going to talk to you about. It's a specific line of attack in this leave no stone unturned strategy of unrestricted warfare that we don't see coming, we're not paying any attention to, and that is now 12 days away from closing the trap. The short form of it is this, and again, Joe will speak, I hope, both about this in more detail, but also in particular what he's doing about it, which is huge. The World Health Organization, WHO, has a Secretary General by the name of Tedros Ghebreyesus. Our friend Trevor Loudon has just done a little video for us about Tedros, which we hope to get out the door here shortly. Among his qualifications for that position is that he is a Maoist who has no medical background, plucked from obscurity in Ethiopia to run this organization by the Chinese Communist Party. He is, in short, an agent of the Chinese Communists. He's also known in some circles as having caused us a little bit of an inconvenience with the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. And I don't mean to be deprecating about this. I mean to say, if we're not thinking about the idea that a guy who recommended, that's all he could do at the time, recommended that we wear masks, we socially distance, we quarantine, we lock down, we take mandatory jabs with inadequately tested vaccines, non-vaccines, gene therapies. The idea that we might do what the World Health Organization is poised to do, which is to give him the power to both dictate what is a public health emergency of international concern and to dictate what we must do about it. Now, we've done some polling on this, a lot of anecdotal evidence. Nobody knows anything about this going on, let alone that it's about to happen. Nobody's had a chance to be informed about it, let alone assent to it. In fact, they haven't even finished writing the treaties that they propose be approved in 12 days' time. Even though their own regulations at the World Health Organization say that you're supposed to give at least 4 months notice and opportunity to see what changes they're making. This is wrong on so many different levels, but the thing that I think is most important for this purpose is the Chinese Communist Party's success in both penetrating and bending to its will these international organizations, and it's not just this one, by the way, it's all of them. And especially if they can pull this off, maybe either way, but in September, they're going to try to do the same thing for the Secretary General of the United Nations. Give him the power to decide when we have some other kind of emergency and to tell us what we have to do about that. So this is all being cast, and this is another of those things that I think Sam, if I'm not mistaken, in the parlance of the intelligence community is called a clue, is they call it global governance. That's what they're trying to bring about. And if you happen to have an attachment, as I do, and I know Karen does, American Freedom Alliance is all about it, to our form of government, you're not going to want to surrender it in the dark of night to Tedros Ghebreyesus or Guterres or anybody else, to say nothing of the man who's bringing us World War Z. Thank you very much.